doing stuff. When you meet someone for the first time, what's one of the first questions you're going to ask them? What do you do for work? Or you've probably, good chance, you've been asked by someone today, what did you do this weekend? What are you doing this week? Elaine has just got to be sick of me coming around the corner at the house asking, hey, what you doing? Because I think that comes out of my mouth more than just about anything else. We just sang the song before the Lord's Supper talking about Jesus. What did he do? We're obsessed with this idea of doing stuff. Because we know the quickest way to understand more about a person is to see what they're up to, what they spend their time with, because we know that what we do is a reflection of who we are. But it's not just us that asks that question. In Matthew 25, Jesus tells a story, and really the point of the story is to ask the question to us, what are you doing? Are you doing what you should be doing? Are you leaving some behind? And so Jesus today is going to look at us in Matthew 25, and he's going to tell us what you're doing and what you're not doing is a reflection of your heart. And that's what Jesus is really interested in getting to. Many of the parables of Jesus are so fascinating to us because they're kind of challenging stories to sift through and understand what he's saying. Jesus tells some complicated stories. He tells some confusing stories with hard to understand applications. Matthew 25 is not that way. The story we're going to read is not at all hard to understand. It's straight to the point. In fact, it's probably one of those stories that as long as you've been a Christian, for however long that is, you've heard this story a lot. And so sometimes we take the parable of the talents of Matthew 25 and we say, that's a good kid's story so that they can understand that. And then we never sit and think, what should we do with this story? Because while the parable of the talents is an easy story to understand, I would suggest to you it is a hard story to apply. And so I want to go into the parable of the talents today, and I want to see how does my heart stack up with the servants in this story? Am I where I need to be? Am I doing what I should be? If you're with me in Matthew 25, we're going to start in a second here in verse 14. But before we get there, I want to just kind of set the stage. This story comes in a much longer section from Jesus, where he's telling a lot of stories and parables and hard sayings that focus some on the destruction of Jerusalem, some on his second coming. And here, Jesus has just finished with the parable of the 10 virgins with their lamps about being ready for the judgment day. And Jesus is going to essentially start our story today by saying, this next story is what the second coming is going to be like. So from the get-go, we see that this story is important. It has eternal consequences. This story is about our hope of eternal life. And it's a story about being ready for Jesus. So if you're in Matthew 25, like I said, we're going to start just with verse 14 through 18. Jesus says, "For it is just like a man about to go on a journey. And he called his own servants and entrusted his possessions to them. To the one he gave 5 talents, to another 2 talents, and to another 1 talent, depending on each one's ability. Then he went on a journey. Immediately, the man who received 5 talents went, put them to work, and earned 5 more. In the same way, the man with 2 talents earned 2 more. But the man who had received 1 talent went off, dug a hole in the ground, and hid his master's money." So as we said, verse 14 starts this by connecting it to the last parable, telling us everything we're going to see in the next 16 verses here. This is a story about the judgment day and about our being ready for it. That's the context and the lens by which we need to interpret the story. And so the first thing we see in this story is there's a man who's going to be going away for a while. And this guy is very wealthy, probably some kind of ruler. He has at least 3 servants, and he gives these servants a total of 8 talents. Now, talents, kind of a funny word to us. Jesus isn't using the word like we use it. This man didn't give his servants the ability to juggle or break dance or something like that. These talents, they're Roman currency. So if you kind of want to picture it in your head, each one of these talents, it's worth, let's say, about $400,000. So it's a pretty big sum of money. And so this man's going to go on a vacation, or he's going to go away for a while, and he divides a lot of money, over $3 million, between his 3 servants for safekeeping while he's gone. He gives the most trusted servant 5 of these talents, the second most trusted 2, and the other servant 1. Now again, these are a lot of money. 1 talent is a lot of money. This is a lot to manage. And the first 2 servants, they're up to the task. We see the emphasis on their work here, what they did with these talents. The first servant, it says, immediately took these 5 talents and put them to work, the scripture says. And he doubled them. And the second servant with 2 did the same. But the last servant doesn't do that. You guys probably know the end of this story, but pretend you don't. Stick with me. You're hearing this for the first time. Jesus is telling this to the first time, and he says, this third servant, he takes his 1 talent, and he digs a hole in the ground, and he puts it in there, and then kind of covers it back up with the dirt. And now we're supposed to ask ourselves, what is he doing? It's in contrast to these first 2 servants. They're doing stuff. They're putting these talents to work, and the third servant does essentially nothing. The story doesn't tell us why yet, but I think we can make a couple of observations. I think it's clearly to keep the 1 talent safe. That's the only reason, really, to hide something. You hide something because you don't want it to be taken from you. And so this servant thinks the easiest or the best way to keep track of the 1 thing he has is to just hide it away so he can dig it right back up when the master comes back, and there you go, and I don't have to do anything else. I can kick back and watch the other 2 servants work. And so there's the setup. The master gives abundantly to his servants' keeping. 2 of them work very hard with what they were given and are given an increase. 1 does nothing, and he doesn't lose anything, but doesn't gain anything either. That's kind of a weird story. And so we should be asking ourselves, what is the point, Jesus? Where are you going with this? And luckily, he tells us, starting back in verse 19. It says, after a long time, the master of those servants came and settled accounts with them. The man who had received 5 talents approached and presented 5 more talents and said, Master, you have given me 5 talents. See, I have earned 5 more talents. And his master said to him, Well done, good and faithful servant. You were faithful over a few things, and so I will put you in charge of many things. Share your master's joy. The man with 2 talents approached and he said, Master, you gave me 2 talents. See, I have earned 2 more talents. And his master said to him, Well done, good and faithful servant. You were faithful over a few things, and I will put you in charge of many things. Share your master's joy. The man who had received 1 talent also approached and said, Master, I know you. You are a harsh man, reaping where you haven't sown and gathering where you haven't scattered seed. And so I was afraid. And I went off and I hid your talent in the ground. See, you have what is yours. And his master replied to him, You evil, lazy servant, if you knew that I reap where I haven't sown and gather where I haven't scattered, then you should have deposited my money with the bankers, and I would have received my money back with interest when I returned. So take the talent from him and give it to the one who has 10 talents. For to everyone who has, more will be given, and he will have more than enough. But from the one who does not have, even what he has will be taken away from him. And throw this good-for-nothing servant into outer darkness, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. So the master comes back, and when he comes back, he immediately comes to see what his servants have done with these blessings and gifts. And when the first two servants come and present with what they were entrusted back, as well as the extra money they made along with it, in verse 21 and 23, they both hear the same praise. Well done, good and faithful servant. It's an awesome thing to hear. A job well done from the master. But it doesn't end there. In some unspecified sense, both of these servants are granted more authority and entrusted with greater gifts and blessings. Essentially, the first two servants are given a promotion. And then the best thing of all, they're told, depending on your translation exactly how it's worded, enter into your master's joy, or share in your master's joy. Again, in the parable, it's kind of vague what that actually means, but clearly there's something amazing coming from the master and being shared with these two good and faithful, hard-working servants. It's a good time all around. Interestingly, the man who brings 5 talents back and the man who brings the 2 talents back are both given the same exact reward. They are both given the same exact blessing. They are both enter in to the master's joy. That's for the first two. It's not nearly as good for the servant who does nothing. It kind of seems like by the time that we're getting to this part where the master is telling the other 2 servants that they're good and faithful, the third servant feels like he realizes he's made a mistake. Because he immediately starts on the defensive in verse 24. He says, Master, I know you, and you're a harsh man. You reap where you haven't sown, and you gather where you haven't scattered seed. And so I was afraid. Notice what he does here. He said, Master, I know you're not going to be happy about this, but I want to let you know, if this makes you feel any better, it's your fault. This reminds me of the Garden of Eden, when God is asking Adam about their sin, and Adam says, all right, yes, we messed up, but you can't be mad at me, God, because it was the woman that you gave me. You did this to me, really. Yes, I messed up, but you can't be mad at me because it's about what you did and how you are. It's just deflecting blame. But it's so silly here, as the master points out, because essentially the line of reasoning is, Master, I know that you're strict. I know you expect a lot. And I know that you are a real go-getter. So I didn't do a single thing. Hope that works for you. It doesn't even make any sense. And yet, I kind of understand it. Because verse 25 tells us that this inaction is done out of fear. The third servant lets fear paralyze him. He lets fear drive him into not doing what he knows he should be doing. But notice the master does not take that as a valid excuse. He calls the fearful servant wicked and lazy, questioning him on how it's possible that he didn't do anything. He says even the smallest amount. If you just would have taken that 1 talent and you just would have put it in the bank and just got just a small amount of interest on it, that would have been better than nothing. And so he takes away the 1 talent that he has. There's no promotion here, no praise, just a condemnation. The story ends in verse 30 with the servant being cast away from his master into a place of deep darkness, away from the master's presence, a place with weeping and gnashing of teeth, which just hammers on for us. This is more than a story about one man's money. This is a story with eternal significance. Jesus kind of gives the moral of the story in verse 29. Did you notice that? In verse 29, we've got this kind of weird moral. For to everyone who has, more will be given, and he will have more than enough. But from the one who does not have, even what he has will be taken away from him. That sounds very odd to us. It doesn't sort of ring like a lot of the other sayings of Jesus. It almost sounds like at first, on first glance, kind of taking it out of context, it kind of almost sounds like Jesus is judging or condemning those who are poor or have material lack. Those who don't have a lot, they're going to have what they have taken away from them, and those who have a lot, they're going to be blessed even more. But I think that would be a mistake, because I think that takes out all of the context that actually informs us on what this saying is supposed to mean. Because remember, this is the same Jesus who says, "Blessed are the poor" in Luke. This is the same God who says, when you sow tears, you will reap gladness. In the context of this parable, what Jesus is saying here, because remember, those who have in this parable are those who faithfully worked for the master. And those who don't have are those who, out of fear or laziness or a combination of the two, squandered what the master had blessed them with. So the moral of this story is really this. To the one who works for the master will make sure that they're blessed and taken care of. And for the one who doesn't work for the master, the one who squanders their master's blessings, every blessing they have, including the very presence of their master, will be taken away from them. It's kind of a weird story. So I think we need to take just a few minutes to make sure we're all on the same page about some of the details of this story. And the first thing we need to do is we just need to figure out exactly what Jesus is talking about here. Some of it's easy, right? The master, very clearly, who leaves is Jesus, that he's going to die, he's going to ascend, and then later he's going to come back to earth. And that means that this whole story is about what Jesus gives. So the talents here are these gifts, resources, indeed talents that Jesus gives to us. It's not a coincidence that our English word for talents comes from this parable. It's any gift that's given to us by God. That's where this comes from. And so we see that this is a story about Jesus giving to those who serve him. I want to notice one key detail about this parable. This is not a parable about the world. Do you notice that? Some of the parables of Jesus, a lot of the parables of Jesus, the good guys in the parables are Christians, and the bad guys are those who reject Christ completely. It's not the case in this story. Notice all three of these men are servants of the master. We'd say all three men have a relationship with Jesus. We could say they're all three Christians. And while two of them are faithful and enter into the joy of the master, one of these Christians doesn't. One of these Christians is cast away from Jesus forever. And that's the thrust of this story. Jesus is making it clear some Christians will miss heaven. Not because they didn't believe, not because they were actively going about doing evil, but because they didn't do anything with the blessings that he had given them. They weren't actively doing good, and so they miss out on hearing, "Well done, good and faithful servant." That's kind of scary. I don't want that for me, and I imagine you don't either. And so we need to really focus in on figuring out what this parable is talking about. And the first thing we need to see in this parable is that everything that you have is given to you by God. You could almost think of it as being given by God as a loan. Everything you have. If you have talents or skills, they're given to you by God and expected to be used in the service of him and others. The resources of your finances, your possessions, the opportunities, they're all given to you by God and expected to be used for service of him and others. God gives to us because he's good. But he wants us to be good in the same way. God gives to us so that we can give to others in the same way he's given to us. In other words, God wants us to do something with the gifts he's given us. And it's not optional. It's not optional. God gave everything he gave to you so that you could use those things to shine your light into the world by giving in the same way that he gives. And that's incredible. And that shouldn't be scary or intimidating. One thing I find interesting in this story is that no one loses anything. Do you notice that? That the two servants who risked both gained. The only real loser is the guy who did nothing. I wonder what this story would be like if the first two servants, if one of them maybe brought the money back at a loss. Not by doing something stupid or wasting all of it, by just making investments that didn't pan out. That happens sometimes. But they both took risks and they were rewarded for it. But the question is, what if it didn't go well? Would the master still be happy with them? If one of the servants said, hey, I tried to put this money to work, made a couple bad investments, it didn't pan out. But in a way, that's kind of unimportant. Because it doesn't happen. And to me, it's almost like the parable borders on guaranteeing that if you risk your resources with godly intent, God will cover. Not in financially, in some sort of health and wealth gospel sort of way. Not every risk you take for God will even be rewarded in this world. But I think one of the points of this parable is whatever you're risking for the sake of serving God with an honest and humble heart, God will see. And God will ensure that that is rewarded. And so we can serve confidently. We can give freely, knowing that God is going to keep filling up our cup as we pour it out to help others. Because the other thing we really need to see in this parable is that doing nothing is not a virtue. Inaction is not a virtue, it's just laziness. Inaction cannot be a good thing. And we need to hear that as Christians. Because Jesus says in Matthew 25, where we're giving shows where our heart is at. Jesus essentially says to us here, I've given a lot to you because I love you. And I want you to love others. So I'm asking, what are you doing with the gifts I've given you? You know, here's something we need to talk about. We do a good job emphasizing that there are things that are the church's job and there are things that are individuals' jobs. That's great. I agree with that. But if we can agree that it's the individual's job to give financially, it's the individual's job to serve in these ways, are you doing your job? Are you doing it? As individuals, are we giving? As individuals, are we serving? As individuals, are we caring for widows and orphans? As individuals, are we going to food banks? Jesus in Matthew 25 asks you, what are you doing? And nothing is not a good enough answer. He makes that perfectly clear. Jesus wants us, in fact, demands that we take our talents and our resources and the things he's given to us to go out and serve others. And this applies in a different way for our churches. I don't have to tell you, we all know the church's job is to shine our lights to others, to encourage them to see the Jesus that we love and serve. We are called to be lights in this community. And we are totally equipped to do that. At Fairview, we have so many incredible Christians here. We have wonderful teachers, we have amazing servants, and wonderful encouragers. We could say we are a 5-talent church, so to speak. And so Jesus asks us, what are we doing with those talents? Are we sharing Jesus? Are we evangelizing? Are we shining our light into our community? Or are we doing nothing? Because nothing is not a good enough answer. Because, as Jesus emphasizes in Matthew 25, what we're doing shows us where our heart is at. The parable of the talents has to shift our thinking. Because Matthew 25, Jesus isn't asking for a full account of everything you're good at, all the resources you have. He's asking you, how are you using them? And the same Jesus that says this tells us this parable is the same Jesus that says, if all you have is a cup of cold water, if all you have is a single mite, then that's what he wants you to give. Some of you may have 5 talents. You may know that God has blessed you richly. I ask you, are you using them? Some of us may know we're the 1 talent man. Maybe we don't have a lot to share. But Jesus asks us in this parable, are you sharing your 1 talent? The good and faithful servants in Matthew 25 are those who are asking Jesus, what can I do? What can I do for you? What can I do for others? And that's the guiding principle of this. Not what do I have to do? What can I do for you, Jesus? The good and faithful servants in Matthew 25 are those who are doing whatever they can with whatever they have. So I don't know what your talents are. I don't know what gifts and opportunities God has given to you, but I know that he has given to you. I know that he has given talents to every person in this room. And all he asks is that you serve with what he's loaned you. And he knows that you can because he's the one that gave you the talents and the opportunities in the first place. And so what we don't want is a situation where we're running from that. We get distracted, or we get afraid, or we get indifferent, and we do nothing, and we're burying our talent in the ground. Don't do that. I promise you, no matter what stage of life you're at, no matter what you think you have to give, God can use you. God can use you in this church. God can use you in this community. Don't let fear and complacency hold you back from the presence of your God. We need to be asking ourselves, what can I do? What can we do as a church together? And let's just do it. Because as Jesus teaches in Matthew 25, if we're faithful with what we're given, if we entrust our blessings to God, if we use them to serve, we will be rewarded. We will have increased blessings and opportunities, and some of those blessings will be here. But I guarantee you they will always be there in the life to come. God gives to us so that we can give to others, and then he'll give to us even more. That's the pattern of Matthew 25. So let's get to work. Let's get giving to show our Master Jesus that we have hearts that love him by using what he's given us to show love to others. The ultimate blessing is that idea at the end of the parable. What those 2 servants hear, well done, good and faithful servant, enter into the joy of your master. The ultimate blessing we can have is the presence of God. And so I urge you as we finish this time together, if there's anything that's holding you back from the presence of God, this is the time we need to address it. If you're not a Christian, if you haven't been forgiven of your sins, if you haven't washed them away in the waters of baptism, this is the time to do it. You can join him. You can enter into your Master's presence in this life, knowing that you're entrusting him for something better to come. But many of us, we are Christians. We have joined him. And yet, at times in our lives, whether fear or laziness or just distraction, we stopped giving. Whether to him or to others around us, we've closed our hearts. Jesus says we need to fix that. We need to address that. And so whatever is in between your heart and your God, we need to take care of it today. If we can help you with that, we'd love to talk with you. We'd love to pray with you and pray for you. Just feel free to let us know as we stand and as we sing.